On January 3, 2026, the United States made a decision that will be studied in war colleges for the next century as the definition of strategic suicide. The headlines were screaming about strength. They showed you the aircraft carriers off the coast of La Guaira. They showed you the capture of Nicolas Maduro. President Trump stood before the cameras, projecting the image of a conqueror, declaring that American oil companies would rebuild Venezuela's broken infrastructure and that the United States would finally control 30% of the world's oil reserves. It was a perfect piece of political theater. It was the ultimate paper illusion, because while the eyes of the world were fixed on the smoke rising from Caracas, the real devastation was happening in complete silence, thousands of miles to the north, in the frozen oil sands of Alberta. What the president did not mention, and what the mainstream media failed to understand, was that while America was busy kicking down the front door of a ruined state, its closest ally and largest oil supplier was quietly unlocking the back door for America's greatest rival. Canada, the nation that has historically sold over 85% of its oil to the United States, essentially functioning as America's strategic energy reserve, executed a historic pivot that Washington never saw coming. For the first time in history, China is now importing more Canadian oil than the United States via the Trans Mountain route. This is not a glitch in the data. This is not a temporary anomaly caused by market fluctuations. This is the result of a catastrophic calculation that prioritized the optical illusion of conquest over the physical reality of logistics. To understand the magnitude of this failure, you have to ignore the political rhetoric and look at the map. The story doesn't begin in Venezuela, it begins in the landlocked heart of Alberta. For decades, Canada was a prisoner of geography. Alberta has some of the largest oil reserves on the planet, but it had a fatal flaw. It is trapped in the interior of the continent with no direct access to the open ocean. This geographical prison meant that Canadian oil could only flow in one direction, south into the United States. This created a market distortion that American refineries on the Gulf Coast exploited ruthlessly. It was a monopsony, a market with only one buyer. Because Canada had no other option, American companies bought Canadian heavy oil at a massive discount, often paying $30 to $50 less per barrel than the global market price. It was essentially an economic tribute paid by the North to the South. The United States grew comfortable, arrogant even, in the belief that this flow of cheap, discounted energy was a law of nature. They believed Canada had no choice. They believed the paper illusion of the alliance would hold forever, regardless of how they treated the partner. But on May 1st, 2024, the physics changed. That was the day the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion finally went operational. This was a project that survived over $24 billion in costs, a decade of delays, endless lawsuits, and vicious political battles. But when the valves opened, it did something the US State Department failed to account for. It tripled the pipeline's capacity to 890,000 barrels per day. To put that number in perspective, that volume is almost equal to the capacity of the Keystone XL pipeline, the very project President Biden cancelled on his first day in office. Suddenly, the geography changed. Canada had access to the Pacific. Suddenly, Canadian oil could flow to Asia. Suddenly, the prisoner had a key. The shift was instantaneous and violent in its speed. Before this expansion, Canada exported a pathetic 7,000 barrels per day to China, a rounding error in the global energy market. It was irrelevant. But since the pipeline went online, that number has exploded. Canada is now exporting an average of 207,000 barrels per day to China. That is a 30-fold increase almost overnight. Compare that to the flows into the United States. In the same period, only 173,000 barrels per day from this specific route went to the US. Do the math. For the first time in history, China is buying more oil from the Trans Mountain pipeline than the United States. While Washington sends fleets to secure oil fields in Venezuela that have been rotting since the 1990s, they are losing the fully operational high-capacity flow from their stable neighbor next door. Why is this happening? Why would Canada, a NATO member and NORAD partner, suddenly turn its back on its biggest trade partner? The answer has a name: Donald Trump. Upon returning to the White House in January 2025, he launched a trade war not just against rivals, but against allies. He threatened tariffs on Canadian goods. He insulted the sovereignty of the nation, calling it the 51st state and joking about annexation. He treated a strategic partner like a conquered vassal. Canadian oil producers took the hint. Even after the energy tariffs were technically waived, the psychological and commercial damage was absolute. Trust is a physical asset in trade, and it was incinerated. A market that the US took for granted for 50 years began to diversify immediately. And waiting on the other side of the Pacific, with open checkbooks and thirsty refineries, was China. This is the disconnect. The US fights a kinetic war for oil it might get in 10 years, while China wins a commercial war for the oil that is flowing today. While the suits in Washington were busy posing for photo ops on aircraft carriers off the coast of Caracas, they forgot to check the plumbing in their own backyard. And that is exactly where they lost the war. You want to know how a superpower loses its energy dominance overnight? It's not through a nuclear strike or a stock market crash. It happens when you ignore the physical reality of infrastructure. The weapon that just slit the throat of the American energy monopoly isn't a hypersonic missile. It's a boring 150-kilometer steel pipe buried under the Canadian Rockies. It's called the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and it is the mechanism of America's defeat. For 50 years, the United States ran the greatest energy scam in history on its polite northern neighbor. It was a classic rigged game. Alberta sits on the third largest oil reserves on Earth, but thanks to geography, they were trapped, landlocked, no way out. The only pipelines led south. This meant Canada had exactly one customer, the USA. And when you only have one customer, you don't set the price. They do. American refineries on the Gulf Coast feasted on this. They bought Canadian oil at a massive artificial discount, stealing it for $30 to $50 below the global market price. It was a stupid tax that Canada paid for the privilege of sharing a border with the US. Washington loved it. They thought they had Canada in a chokehold forever. But on May 1st, 2024, the chokehold broke. That was the day the Trans Mountain expansion went live, and the physics of the North American energy market changed forever. This project was a nightmare to build. It cost over $24 billion, way over budget. It fought through 10 years of protests, court injunctions, and political sabotage. But unlike the American pipe dreams in Venezuela, this thing actually got built. And when they flipped the switch, they didn't just open a pipe, they opened an escape tunnel. Here is the data that should terrify every strategic planner in the Pentagon. The expansion didn't just add a little flow, it tripled the line's capacity to 890,000 barrels per day. Let that number sink in. That is almost the exact same capacity as the Keystone XL pipeline. You remember Keystone, right? The pipeline America spent a decade arguing about before killing it on day one of the Biden presidency. The US thought killing Keystone would save the planet. All it did was force Canada to build a different pipe, one that doesn't go to Texas. It goes to the Pacific. It goes to China. This is the ultimate irony. The oil that was supposed to fuel American industry is now fueling the Chinese rise, and it's flowing through a pipe that is essentially Keystone's evil twin. The moment Trans Mountain went operational, the friendship discount evaporated. Canadian producers finally had a second option. They could tell the American refineries to pay full price or watch the oil sail to Shanghai. And guess what? The price gap collapsed. Western Canadian Select is trading at its highest levels in years. Canadian producers are pocketing an extra $8.50 per barrel in pure profits that used to belong to US companies. The mechanism works. It is brutal, efficient, and irreversible. While the US burns $9 million a day enforcing a blockade on a broken country like Venezuela, hoping to squeeze out a drop of oil in 10 years, Canada is already pumping nearly 1 million barrels a day to the highest bidder. The pipeline is already running at 84% capacity. They are looking to expand it further. The infrastructure is in the ground, the concrete has set, the steel is welded. You cannot sanction physics. You cannot tweet away a pipeline. America thought it was the only player at the table. They didn't realize that while they were arguing over the appetizer, Canada and China were building a new table in the other room. The mechanism is active, the trap is sprung, and the US is left holding an empty hose. If you want to watch a superpower bleed to death, don't look at the battlefield. Look at the spreadsheet. Look at the shipping manifests leaving the Westridge Marine Terminal in Vancouver. That is where the American empire is suffering a hemorrhage that no amount of military spending can patch up. Before May 1st, 2024, the numbers were a joke. Canada sent about 7,000 barrels a day to China. In the oil game, that's nothing. That's spillage. The US looked at that number and laughed. They thought, cute. Canada is selling a few drops to the pandas. Who cares? They were arrogant, they were comfortable, and they were dead wrong. Fast forward to today, and the laughter has stopped. The panic has set in. Since the Trans Mountain Pipeline roared to life, that number didn't just double or triple. It exploded by 3,000%. We went from 7,000 barrels to an average of 207,000 barrels per day. This isn't a trend, it's a vertical line on a chart. It's a middle finger to US energy dominance drawn in crude oil. For the first time ever, the new capacity isn't feeding the American addiction, it's feeding the Chinese strategic reserve. Let's be brutally honest about what this means. The United States is losing the bidding war for its own neighbors' resources. In the same time frame that China sucked up 207,000 barrels a day, the US only managed to secure 173,000 from the new flow. China is winning. The math is simple, and it is terrifying for anyone holding US energy stocks. The monopoly is over. The days of buying Canadian oil for pennies on the dollar because they have nowhere else to go are gone. Now, when a US refinery in Texas wants that heavy crude, they have to outbid Beijing. And Beijing has deep pockets and a very long memory. Look at the Chinese response. They are ruthless. They slashed their imports of US crude by 90%. They basically told American producers, keep your oil, we have a better dealer now. And why wouldn't they? US oil comes with political strings attached, with the threat of sanctions, with the headache of the National Defense Authorization Act blocking their ships. Canadian oil? It flows straight from a friendly port, across the open Pacific, with zero US Navy interference. It is the perfect strategic hedge. The panic in Washington is palpable because they know they can't stop it. They can't sanction Canada without blowing up NATO. They can't blockade Vancouver without starting World War III. So they have to sit there and watch 70% of the tankers leaving British Columbia turn west instead of south. 70%. That is a complete capture of the export market. While Trump screams about tariffs and annexing Canada, the Canadian oil industry is quietly integrating itself into the Asian supply chain. This is the paper illusion crumbling in real time. On paper, the US and Canada are inseparable allies. In physical reality, Canada is fueling the rise of America's greatest adversary. The US refineries are now scrambling. They are seeing their margins evaporate as the discount on Canadian oil disappears. The panic isn't just about losing oil, it's about losing control. For a century, the US controlled the energy thermostat of North America. Now someone else has their hand on the dial. And while the US burns billions trying to conquer the ruins of Venezuela, China just bought the premium subscription to Canadian energy for the price of a pipeline toll. It's game over for the monopoly. The market has spoken, and it speaks Mandarin. In finance, there is a term for what the United States is doing right now: catching a falling knife. They are betting everything on a distressed asset that is fundamentally broken while ignoring the blue-chip stock sitting right next to them. The US logic for invading Venezuela hinges on one sexy number: 303 billion barrels of oil reserves. It sounds huge. It sounds like a jackpot. But anyone who actually works in energy knows that reserves in the ground mean absolutely nothing if you can't get them out. Venezuela isn't an oil power anymore. It's a rust bucket sitting on a gold mine. The infrastructure is totally destroyed. Production has crashed from 3.5 million barrels a day down to less than 1 million. The refineries are scrap metal. To fix this mess, estimates say you need to burn through $100 to $110 billion, and the timeline? 10 years. Minimum. So the US plan is basically, let's spend billions on a war, then spend $100 billion more on repairs, and maybe in 2036 we get some oil. That is not an investment, that is a money pit. Meanwhile, look at Canada. The US treats Canada like a boring savings account, ignoring the fact that it just turned into a high-growth crypto asset for China. Canada doesn't need a 10-year rebuild. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is shiny, new, and pumping cash right now. The economics are already printing money. Canadian producers are seeing their netbacks jump by $8.50 a barrel. The pipeline is generating nearly $2 billion in cash flow, up from a measly $200 million. This is instant gratification. This is real revenue. China looked at the board and made the smart play. Why spend a decade and a fortune trying to fix a broken Venezuela when you can just buy the premium product from Canada today? China didn't have to invade anyone. They didn't have to spend $9 million a day on a naval blockade. They just signed the check. The US is acting like a desperate house flipper trying to renovate a condemned mansion while the house is on fire. China just bought the fully furnished penthouse across the street. Washington thinks they are playing 4D chess, but looking at the valuation, they are just losing money on a bad bet while Beijing collects the rent. The media tells you this is about trade deficits. The politicians tell you it's about jobs. They are lying. This is about a choke point called the Strait of Malacca. Look at a map. That tiny sliver of water between Malaysia and Indonesia is the most dangerous place on earth for the Chinese Communist Party. 80% of their oil has to squeeze through that gap. It is a kill zone. China knows that if things ever get hot over Taiwan, the US Navy just has to park 2 destroyers in that strait, and China's lights go out in a month. It is their Achilles heel. They call it the Malacca Dilemma. For 20 years, China has been desperate to solve this. They built the Belt and Road Initiative not to be nice, but to survive. They burned billions building pipelines through unstable stand countries and ports in corrupt backwaters just to find a way around the US Navy. It was messy. It was dangerous. And then America's best friend handed them the solution on a silver platter. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is the ultimate cheat code for China's energy security. Why? Because the Pacific Ocean is wide open. A tanker leaving Vancouver doesn't have to go through Malacca. It doesn't have to sail past US bases in the Middle East. It draws a straight line from Canada to China. No choke points, no US Navy interference, no blockade risk. This is why Beijing is rushing to sign 10-year contracts with Canadian producers. They aren't just buying oil, they are buying insurance against the US military. They are paying a premium for blockade-proof energy. While the US is distracted playing soldier in Venezuela, thinking they can control the world's oil by force, China just neutralized America's biggest naval advantage by simply buying oil from America's neighbor. The trap has been bypassed. The dilemma is solved, and the oil flowing from Canada is the fuel that makes China immune to an American stranglehold. Think of this like a divorce. For 50 years, the US and Canada were married. Sure, the US was an abusive partner, demanding discounts, threatening trade wars, cancelling pipelines on a whim, but they were married. The US thought Canada would never leave because Canada had nowhere else to go. They thought they owned the house. But while America was busy screaming at the TV about Venezuela, Canada quietly packed its bags, took the dog, and moved into a new luxury condo funded by China. And here is the harsh truth that US politicians refuse to admit. Canada isn't coming back. This isn't a trial separation. This is a permanent exit. Why? Because the ink is dry on the contracts. We aren't talking about a few barrels sold on eBay. We are talking about massive ironclad 10-year supply agreements between Canadian giants and Chinese state-owned refineries. These contracts are legally binding shackles. Even if the US woke up tomorrow, apologized, and offered to buy every drop of Canadian oil at full price, they couldn't get it. That oil is already spoken for. It belongs to China until the mid-2030s. The pipeline capacity is fully booked. The seats on the lifeboat are taken. The US missed the boat while they were busy trying to sink it. This is the exit from the American orbit. The infrastructure itself has changed. The pipes, the pumps, the loading arms at the West Ridge Marine Terminal, they are all calibrated now for the Pacific trade route. China is retooling its refineries to process this specific type of heavy Canadian crude. That creates a technological lock-in. Once you build the machine to run on a specific fuel, you don't switch back. The arrogance of Washington was believing that geography was destiny. They thought Canada had to sell south. They forgot that steel pipes and oil tankers can rewrite geography. The US is now looking north and seeing a sold-out sign. They have been relegated from strategic partner to backup plan. The exit is complete. The locks have been changed, and America doesn't have a key. This is the end of the line. The game is over, and the scoreboard is ugly. January 3rd, 2026 won't be remembered as the day America liberated Venezuela. It will be remembered as the day America officially lost the energy war. The fatal error wasn't a glitch. It was the inevitable result of arrogance. The US thought it could bully its friends and bomb its enemies and still remain the king of the hill. They were wrong. While Washington was chasing the paper illusion of Venezuelan oil, a fantasy that requires billions of dollars and 10 years to realize, China seized the physical reality of Canadian oil today. They played the long game. They understood that pipes are more powerful than tweets. They understood that trust is a currency, and the US is bankrupt. The lockdown is in effect. The North American energy fortress, which was supposed to keep the US safe forever, has been breached from the inside. The call is coming from inside the house. China has secured its lifeline, bypassing the US Navy and locking down the resources of America's closest neighbor. Don't let the news anchors gaslight you. When they show you footage of Marines in Caracas, look away. Look at the tankers leaving Vancouver. That is where the power is shifting. The US is now an empire in isolation. Surrounded by oceans it can no longer fully control and allies it can no longer fully trust. The oil war struck back, and it didn't miss. Stop listening to the lies. Subscribe for the reality. Game over.